Hello, it is I, Beyond a Hero, back with another video. In my last video, at least my last proper video, I said to you guys that I was going to be ranking every game from worst to best. And that is what I'm going to offer to you guys today. Now, I'm going to be honest. All the 6 games from Skylanders, they're all good in their own ways. And none of them will ever reach my top 10 worst. Despite this, it was pretty easy for me to rank them. Before we get into the video, I have some rules. None of the games are going to be ranked judging by the roster. This is because I already made a video about ranking every roster, so a title card will appear up here right now. The only sort of figures that will be judged on this list are the gimmick figures, such as the vehicles from SuperChargers. And of course, probably the most obvious rule, this is my personal opinion. So if your favorite Skylanders game is at the bottom of the list, please don't be mad, it's just my opinion. And with that, let's get straight to it.
Number 6. Yeah, so I don't think this choice was a surprise to anyone. Skylanders Imaginators was a terrible way to end the Skylanders franchise. Before we continue on why it's my least favorite Skylanders game, let's talk about the plus sides. The Creation Crystal gimmick is a really unique gimmick as it lets you create your own Skylander. While that creation process already is fun in itself, there's a few hindrances. All the battle classes are literally forced into the creation crystals, meaning that unfortunately you can't literally express your imagination, meaning that you can't create a dragon Skylander basically. Another thing to point out is that the sorcerers, like the one I'm playing here, all of them float, but there's not an option to make them stand. Another thing is the ninjas, as they're literally glorified orbs with arms. Can we have a body on them, please? And the swashbucklers, 2 swords are cool, right? Then how can we have a tail? Can't we have normal legs, please? Despite all these problems, the creation crystals are pretty solid, since there's loads of pieces available, meaning that if you want a polar bear Skylander, there you have it. Pieces to make a polar bear Skylander. Now let's look at the actual game itself. It's not bad per se, but the story is actually among the weakest out of all the other Skylanders games. It's just essentially about Chaos being a massive douchebag yet again, finding Imaginite pieces, then making Doomlanders, whatever the hell they're supposed to be, and then also finding this sentient brain and all the popular Skylanders thrown in as NPCs. Digressing on about the Skylanders being NPCs, this basically ruins the original NPCs, where we don't get to see at all other than side missions. The Skylanders chose their NPCs were Spyro, Gilgrunt, Trigger Happy, Eruptor, Stealth Elf, Jetvac, and Pop Fizz. And the irony is that all of them, barring Gilgrunt, appear in the Skylanders Academy cartoon, which is a show I'm not even a big fan of. And all of the Skylanders, while retaining their unique personalities, I didn't really have much of an enjoyable or relatable experience with them, except for Jetpack, but you know that I have bias for the guy. The levels are extremely bland, and when I replay Imaginators by myself, they're not really engaging, which is why I much prefer to play Skylanders Imaginators with a friend. Now, the worst thing about Imaginators, I know I'm not trying to discuss about the roster, but I'm breaking the rules a little bit to talk about this problem, but they nerfed all the original characters from Skylanders Adventure to SuperChargers in order to get kids to buy the Imaginators figures, which is one of the reasons why I dislike the Skylanders Imaginators roster heavily. Despite all these problems, Imaginators is a decent game. It's not one of my favorites, but Activision could have done a lot better for making a final Skylanders game. I mean, at least have Terfin as an NPC. Number 5. So, Skylanders Swap Force is a pretty good game. Personally, I am a fan of the long levels. For me, this just keeps the game more engaging and interesting. But when I was recording a gameplay clip for this Skylanders game, I thought that I didn't want to take forever to make a single clip, so that's why I used this segment from the arena battles instead. The story of Skylanders Swap Force is actually pretty interesting, and he even introduces Chaos' mum to add more things to the mix. And Chaos finding the Petrified's darkness is a pretty interesting concept as it turns any enemy evil, or anything evil, basically. Compared to the rest of the Skylanders games, it doesn't really feel much like a Skylanders game, but this is because it's set in Woodborough, which is a faraway place in Skylands, which makes the game more interesting, but then that's also one of its downfalls. Many of the original Skylanders NPCs are completely replaced with the exception of Flynn, because who doesn't like Flynn? Although Callie is replaced by Tessa, Tessa is a really interesting character, so I can forgive Tessa for that. Persephone is completely replaced by Gorm, who is just a bland, tough guy character. Auric is replaced by Turk, who, while is slightly more interesting than his younger brother, still isn't a completely engaging character. Then Hugo is replaced by Rufus, who at first seemed like a promising character, but just gets annoying since you can't skip his dialogue. Most of these new characters make very little impact in the story, and the only characters that will return in later games are Tessa, Sharpfin, and Baron Volden Shellshock. The whole gimmick of Skylanders Swap Force is to be able to swap, but that makes very little impact in the story itself. Another thing worth mentioning is that all the levels seem to have their own gimmick in, which ends up being frustrating because either of them are turret sections or just boring minigames. While the graphics, while a bit underwhelming at first, is okay, the graphics in the Wii port of Swap Force is terrible and they're eye-bleeding. Swap Force is overall a great game, but I can't deny the many flaws it has. Number 4. Skylanders Giants is a game I don't really have much problems with. One thing I immediately like about Skylanders Giants is the fact that all the original Skylanders Adventure characters finally have voices, so now there's not really much nightmare fuel for younger kids anymore. And unlike the Swap Force, the Giants are actually useful in their own game, being able to bust up walls so that they don't have to collect a bomb. Yet again, we have another interesting story, this time about Chaos wanting to get the Fist of Arcus so that he can rule Skylands, and it's up to the Skylanders to try stop him. This already makes the story unique because it actually focuses on one of Skylanders' most well-known enemies, the Archeans, and because of the story of this game, it's why I heavily adore the Archeans so much. Also because of Chop Chop and Drill Sergeant. All the levels have their own unique aesthetic to them. I mean, come on, one of the levels have a rapping drilling machine. What is not to love? There's generally nothing wrong with Skylanders Giants. It's just compared to the other Skylanders games, I just feel I had to place it here purely because of gut instinct. Number 3. Yeah, so Skylanders Adventure is a classic. The story for this game may be simple, but it's effective. It's where all the Skylanders has been banished from Skylands, while Chaos finds the 8 elemental sources, and it's up to you, the Portal Master, to bring the Skylanders into the portal and bring them back to Skylands, which, at this time, it was a pretty unique concept. All the levels feel fresh and unique, and even though some are similar to others, it works in its own favor. Also, most of the NPCs are really lovable and memorable, such as Gurglefin, Flynn, Callie, General Robot, Snuckles, and the list goes on. There's only one big bad to the game, and it's the fact that not all the Skylanders generally talk, and it can be a bit disturbing to younger players. Apart from this, Skylanders Adventure is a game I heavily recommend. Number 2. This may be a controversial pick, but don't worry, I have my reasons why Skylanders SuperChargers is my second favorite Skylanders game. From the get-go, SuperChargers already has a great story, taking place in a Skylands already invaded by Chaos, which is a really interesting concept. I'm also a huge fan of the vehicle segments, because not only are they fun in my opinion, but also they can even help you skip ahead to some parts of the levels. The story also varies a lot. You go from the Battle Brawl Island, where you try find a spell punk to help you do some research basically, then you end up going to some islands to take back the Eye of the Ancients, which you need to build the last piece of the Core of Light, It's just a very interesting and intriguing story. Last, but for sure certainly not least, we have my favorite Skylanders game, Skylanders Trap Team. The whole gimmick of Skylanders Trap Team already gives me nostalgia from his LEGO Hero Factory Breakouts line, where the heroes have to try cuff the enemies and bring them back to jail. But a part that this game makes it even better, you get to trap the enemies and then you play as them. This is still one of my favorite gimmicks to this day. Not to mention, while the story and concept is a bit basic, it is very well executed, with all the Doom Raiders escaping Cloudcracker prison, and you have to try find them. Luckily, the Doom Raiders are not generic evil guys, they each have their own personality. And yes, people, I'm afraid to admit it, but Dreamcatcher is my favorite Doom Raider, so not to mention that this game introduces brand new characters that became fan favorites in the community. For example, villains Golden Queen and Wolfgang, and new NPCs Max and Buzz. This video game is definitely in my top 5 video games, and I do hope someday I can make a ranking video where I rank all the video games I have in my collection. Anyway, if you like this video, like, comment, and subscribe. And remember, I'm open to any opinions. And I'll see you next time.